welcome to Mrs. Cog's Craft Room. I am going to do a video today on how I sew on paper. Several people have asked me to show them a more close-up of my procedure, and I wanted to show you first my sewing machine. This is a Rascog type cart that it's sitting on. It's different because I get mine at Target, and it has these wonderful handles, these larger bars that come up. The regular Rascogs do not have anything to grip and grab and move them with. And what I've done is I've assembled it and then just flipped the top basket upside down to become a portable table. I found that if I go quickly with my stitching, that the metal on it wants to bounce. So my husband just cut a board to set under it, and that took care of that issue. The other thing I wanted to show you was I've got these fabulous magnetic bowls, they're called. I think my husband found that on Amazon, and they clip right to it and they magnetize whatever sticks. So I always have scissors to grab. I have one on the side for my jewelry, pliers, and that type of thing, and they just stick there magnetically. And now that I've got it, I don't know how I ever lived without it. So that is my setup. I've got the 100 stitch Brother machine, pretty standard these days for what passes for a typical, very versatile machine, and I find it does everything that I need it to do for paper crafts. So let me get the camera mounted and we'll get started. A couple of housekeeping details. I guess I should preface this with I don't know how to sew. That is, I never was taught how to sew or learned traditional methods, and not until I discovered paper crafting did I discover there were tutorials on YouTube to teach me much of what I wanted to know. So what I do is what I've figured out and adapted to be my style over time. And while I show you this, I picture experienced quilters like Paula Forder or Rhonda Winstead cringing, saying, "You're doing it wrong," much the way my teenagers love to tell me with my social media. So I do keep my manual handy, and I actually practice on it a good deal. And if you do sew on your sewing machine manual, it's also a wonderful way not to lose it. It doesn't get lost in a stack of books and put to the side, because before now I could never find my manuals when I needed to know how this or that worked. Something else I want to tell you is with the Brothers, it comes with various little foots that you put your whatever you're sewing under, your paper under. And with the Brother brand, they're lettered, and certain stitches here you use the J foot, and other ones you use the N foot. And I very quickly got tired of switching back and forth experimenting, and discovered the 3 stitches I use almost all the time. I could use the N as in Nancy foot for all of them, and that is not what the instructions tell me to do. So usually goes on quite easy. There we go. So I am using my N foot for the straight stitch, the zigzag stitch, and that is also what I use when I go to my number 27 daisies or my number 94 cross stitch type stitches. But let's go to the basics. I have a sheet of printer paper, regular printer paper, that I went through my process of tea dyeing. I baked it and ironed it and such, and I've just folded it in half. So this could be any sheet of paper. And I've taken some images from the Autumn Days collection. But you can do this with pictures that are cut out of a magazine or a book or any other DigiKit. And usually when I am not putting something in back of it or leaving it open as a pocket, I'll go ahead and I'll run 2 strips down the middle of my ATG gun just to stick it in place so it won't move. And I'm sure the same would work with any type of glue. If you want it firmly set in place, I'm just going to hold it here. And on my end foot here on my sewing machine, let's see if I can get you close in here. The foot is actually marked in the middle. It's got a little divot, so I know where the center of a zigzag stitch is going to be. I know it's going to be in the divot of the foot there. So I can watch and see that the edge of my image goes in the middle where that divot is. I'm going to pick a zigzag stitch here, which on my machine is number 4. And what I do is, if this is a regular default stitch, just the zigzag that comes up, I tell it to scunch. I put it down at least one setting. I don't worry about the length of the stitch, just the scunch of the stitch. And that, I think, is what gives me the look of having tightly sewed edges on mine. So I'm just going to start this and back stitch. Of course, you're watching, so my tail got stuck in there. That's okay. And I am just going to guide this right through. When I get close to the corner, I'm going to go to an inside corner, pick up my foot, and pivot this. There we go. Trying not to keep you focused on the back of my hand there. And pivot again. And then mine has a little catch on the back where you can tear the strings, but they still need to be trimmed. And because I always back stitch a stitch or two at the beginning and the end, you can pull these out and cut them rather close. I keep a trash can next to, little tiny trash can next to my sewing machine where I can just kind of throw the edges of the paper. Okay, zoom out. There we go. And it's stitched on there with a nice tight stitch. The next thing I wanted to show you was you can do basically the same thing, and I'll go through this much faster. I just took a big piece of cheesecloth. It is tea-dyed. I cut it oversized. You can trim it beforehand if you want and do the same thing. Put some ATG on the paper where you're going to attach it and just stick it right down. Or if you feel comfortable doing so, you can just hold it. You can trim the cheesecloth before you stitch. I don't, because I end up lumping it and gluing it down with white glue around the edges, and I trim it then. So I'm just going to go through this one extra quick and just show you the effect. And pivot. Some days I can't get the pivot right to save my life, and you can always just back stitch a few, literally back right up, and then turn it the way you want it. backstitch if you. I know that not everyone backstitches, so that's just a me preference, and that comes out really nice. So you can just, like I said, I just scrunch this up. I put a little blobs of white glue and kind of crimp it down and trim it, and it gives it a nice little effect. So the next thing I wanted to show you was you can easily make pockets doing this. And of course you don't want to put ATG in back of your image then, because then you can't stick anything in the pocket. I can't tell you how many planned pockets I ended up turning into just pictures on the page because I went ahead and put some ATG. And when I went to stick something in the pocket, it was sealed, and I had to go back and run one more zigzag. There we go, and I'll just trim off the ends, and it makes a really neat pocket for the page. Now this is a really neat trick. What I've done for this picture is I've cut a piece of canvas. So I'm sewing the paper onto canvas, and this is a wonderful workaround if I wanted a picture with buttons on it, or a pocket that's in a book that's already got a binding here. What I'm going to do is just stitch this right onto the canvas, and then I can sew buttons, and then you can, with fab tack, glue it onto the page of whatever book you want. So you can add in that with your planner, or a smash book, or anything that you've already bound, a junk journal that you've already bound, and you can't necessarily easily run a page through the sewing machine. And canvas is the magic vehicle that will let you go back and get a sewed image into your book. Now, as a confirmed button addict, I can tell you that if you sew the buttons on before you zigzag or stitch it onto another page or canvas or whatever, you need to leave enough room for that foot to fit around the outside, or else it's going to push your stitches, and you won't be able to get an even stitch with it. Got another image on a page here, and I'm just going to throw this back onto the default setting for a straight stitch. Actually, it's a straight stitch with the needle to the left because that's the way I'm used to it. But just your most basic straight stitch. And again, I'm just going to back stitch ever so slightly. It's so nice that this doesn't bounce anymore. My husband listens to my little grumbles about my craft situations, and he just fixes them. It's so handy. So I'm just going to straight stitch. And the back stitch I especially like with anything I'm going to use as a pocket. It gives that extra little reinforcement for something that's going to see some traffic. And again, the straight stitch will just give it some variety and a bit of a different effect. But that's all there is to that. For sewing tabs onto the sides of paper or even some lace down the side. I generally put it into one of three categories. It's either a fabric textile type weave or cotton. It's what I call a soft lace or a crunchy lace. I call it a crunchy lace because when the needle hits it, it kind of makes a kerchunk noise, and it wants more heavy-duty force to go through certain places where it's knotted, like this poly Venice lace that we get at Hobby Lobby. So the only difference in sewing these on, I'll show you. The neat thing about this is you can do it either onto a page, like the ones we just sewed on that are going to go into a project, or you can take a book like the manual and attach it onto the page. So I'm just going to hold this in place. This is the soft lace. So with soft lace, I go ahead and use a zigzag stitch. Usually I'll take a pencil and I'll mark on the page where I want it to go, unless it's just a kind of haphazard thing like this. And I do the same thing that I do with the paper, and I've got this on a zigzag stitch with, I did not scrunch it, just a regular zigzag stitch. And I'll go through it a couple stitches and then back it up a few. And because the lace is nice and soft, it goes right through it. And we have a tab on the side. With the crunchy lace, I always go back to a straight stitch. There's just too much resistance to have the zigzag go through it in any kind of a meaningfully uniform way. So I've got this back on a regular straight stitch, and I always start out slower. Oh, I'm unthreaded. Okay, let's see how quick I can do this on camera. I have some days when I can't get this threaded quickly to save my life, and other days where I'm just in Zen sewing mode. There we go. Okay, so I didn't even move this. I'm just going to start by backstitching a few. Really, it didn't crunch once. The one time you want it to, it doesn't. Okay. Well, you know, that's got a nice straight stitch on there. And I'll just trim those ends off. And then the last thing is my little fabric tabs. I'm to the point now where I walk through a fabric store and I picture little patches of things cut out of the fabric. I don't even look for it for broader applications like covering journals anymore. I just, what can I make pretty that will stick out of the books? And it's funny how our eye for things change. Okay, so this is, let me make sure I'm not sewing two pages together. That would be fun. And I'm going to go back to a zigzag stitch for this. Again, I'm not gonna scrunch it. I'm just gonna leave it on a regular zigzag. There we go. So that is all I've got for you today. I'm going to sometime in the next couple weeks come back and show you my own personal project of how I sew Christmas cards. And I like to start on that September, October, so that when December, I don't know, 15th-ish comes around, a little earlier, I can mail them all out then, but the project is well in the bag, and we can all fast forward to other holiday things that keep us busy. So when I do get to sewing my Christmas cards, I will be back with a video on that. Same techniques that I showed you today. It's just how I assemble them and put them together. So thanks so much for joining me. I will have some useful links related to what we talked about today in the description box below the video. If you are not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button and the bell below. And I appreciate you joining me. I'll be back soon. Thanks. Bye.